Howdy, folks. I'm Ross Weaver. Welcome back to my Metal Gear Solid V Explained lecture series. We're going to be getting into lecture number 16 today, talking about Mission 32, To Know Too Much, and Mission 33, C2W Subsistence. Excuse me. Now, we're going to be getting into what happens after, essentially what happens after the fall of Outer Heaven. Now, we know everything that we're talking about leading up to Mission 30 is kind of covering this phase from 90 to 95. And since we already know what happened in the fall of Outer Heaven, the game doesn't really need to cover it again, so it doesn't. It skips it. So, like I said with the last mission, how everything we see there is kind of a setup for our own fall that's to follow if Mission 30 and 31 happen in 94. Well, since Sahelanthropus is kind of us, you could kind of consider that as a stand-in really for our own fall in 95. And almost consider like maybe you are Solid Snake and you're taking down yourself in a way, Venom Snake. So what follows then is sort of a period of just a lot of cover-up stuff, basically, and a lot of let's say laundering of identities and personalities and things like that, so that the right people can stay in the right places and continue this whole cover-up and keep things going consistently while also sort of, like I said, burying the legacy of the mutiny here. So, To Know Too Much is Mission 32. We are tasked with going and finding this CIA, I think he's an informant, and he's escaped his captors and he's out in the desert somewhere and he sent us a communique and he needs us to come pick him up. But there's guys coming to get him. This scenario should sound familiar to you by now. And I've kind of been skirting around this whole point a little bit so that we can talk about it here, and I didn't have to delve into it earlier. But this guy who is a prisoner who escapes on his own when he's left on his, to his own devices, it's essentially a stand-in for Fox, really for Chico. Going back to Mission 14 in Lingua Franca, that first prisoner I talk about who's brought in and has the first little small interrogation, not really interrogation, just conversation, who's brought over to the cell with the woman. If you take out all of the guards, say you let him get over to the cell, and you take out all the guards around him, just put him to sleep, and you don't disturb anybody else around there, the guy will just start walking away on his own. So he's kind of like, this is your sign that Chico's kind of the guy who tends to walk away on his own. And that's how he's likened really to Hideo, who's the other one who kind of we're seen walking away on his own in Rescue the Intel Agents, and that kind of likens Hideo's stuff back to Miller a little bit too in the Hamid Survivor. And if you don't intervene, he'll be killed and all this kind of stuff. So all the same kind of themes. Again, if we don't intervene here, he'll be killed. But the way in which he's killed here is kind of interesting, and we'll get into that. But what's really going on here is we're chasing down all of the sort of the phantoms that are left from this mutiny. And that's why this whole idea of Skullface's phantom hanging around is happening. As it's like the phantom of Skullface is sort of like the legacy of this mutiny, and all of Big Boss's just sort of evil actions that he's done that need to be sort of wiped from the system. Because the way the AI works is they're going to take Big Boss's actions and sort of reauthor new scenarios based on his actions, and that would be terrible. So Fox has to step in with all of his resources and everything after Big Boss is taken out, and since he's Big Boss now, he can sort of reauthor all of that stuff himself, so he can reproduce it himself in a way where it's more controlled, and there's less bad stuff going on in the in what happens next in the recreations and so on. And so that's again why Skullface is sort of like tanking all of the bad stuff himself and then taking a dive on purpose to sort of like I said. It's sort of like a money laundering thing or something almost. You could think of it like that. But so this legacy of Big Boss is like a ghost, and we're kind of trying to chase it down. And this CIA guy has a link to it. Now, I'll just go ahead and say it. This guy that we're rescuing here is Ishmael. It's essentially, that's our Skullface. He's died. He's transformed, and now he's got a new identity, and he's switching sides. He's coming over to our side. We know Skullface was working on the Soviet side up to this point, and now he's working kind of on the. He wasn't really working on the Soviet side, but sort of manipulating the Soviets. We know he was kind of using them as his proxy, you would say. And then now he's switching over to the CIA. He was a CIA informant, so he's been informing to the CIA, the American side. So he's now switching back over. And that's why XOF is hunting him down. This remnant of XOF is really run by Ocelot now, probably, because he'd be the only one left, in command on that side of things against Zero. And Ocelot's the one, if you radio in about this guy, who we're going to get to in a second, Ocelot's the one who tells you all this story about who this guy might be. And he kind of lets you on to what's really going on if you pay close attention. But anyways, I want to go back to when the mission starts. It's kind of a replay or a revisit of Mission 3, A Hero's Way, because you're kind of landing at the same LZ if you do it all sort of the standard way, kind of implying that you've finished a loop, and now you're starting a new one. And instead of going left over to Shago Village, you take it right, and we head over here to Lamar Khatay Palace. And we find this, towards Lamar Khatay Palace. You can pick the guy up if you want to, but we're going to get to why you wouldn't want to do that for all of the script for all the mission tasks. But first, also, I want to note, on your way to your objective area, you'll be going through all these sand dunes. And I just kind of want to get the idea out there in your head of thinking of these sand dunes as like water waves in the ocean. It's kind of implied that, all this stuff I've been saying about superimposing the bases, the sea bases structure on the land here. You can also kind of take it to, like, if it's over the water, then these sand dunes are kind of like water, and it's kind of like Fox is doing some jet skiing here. This is all maybe happening on some aquatic place, and we just see it as a desert. Although, it is a desert. And I'll get to it, but this is still happening. If this is happening after what we saw in the last mission being in 94, what's happening here is probably happening after the fall of Outer Heaven in either late 95 or early 96. And I'll get to the timeline stuff more when we get to the next mission. So, for this mission, if you want to do all of the mission tasks, you've got to evac, or you've got to Fulton, the assassin that's sent to kill your target. In order for that assassin to be sent to kill your target, you have to let him get captured and brought back to the base and put in this house. And then he just sits there, and then there's a little radio conversation, and they say that he might have the linguistic parasite, so don't have any contact with him. Which, again, we know Skullface has got the linguistic parasite, and so that would explain why they're even saying that at all. And then once all that's happened, the guy shows up in a Jeep, walks over to the prisoner, and kills him. If you don't intervene. And then if that happens, it's mission over. So the way you got to do it is you wait for that guy to get out of his Jeep, and then basically either put him to sleep and take him before anybody can see. I usually just at that point take down the whole guard post. And then I'll evac the prisoners that were extra prisoners, and then get my prisoner in the Jeep, and then get this. Now, if you get this guy and interrogate him, he's in a different outfit than all the rest of the soldiers in this outfit, and he says he's a Soviet soldier, but from the way he's talking and the way his subtitles pop up and everything else, it seems like he's not really a Soviet. He's a standing in for a Soviet guy. He's a fake Soviet essentially, and again, I think that goes back to how XOF was probably like more of a secret unit that stood on its own, and because it was Fox's unit really, and it served to kind of help mediate the gap between the Zero faction and the Big Boss faction and all the stuff that had happened because of the struggles there. And I also think Eva and the China stuff is kind of related to this faction too, and how why China just seems to not be present in any of the affairs of Metal Gear. I think the whole like China influence thing is the Chinese are like a sort of a cover that they use for this secret third party's influence. Really, XOF. And so, I also want to mention that there's D-Walkers here, and they're in Afghanistan. So we've been in Africa this whole time. We've seen the D-Walkers there, and we saw D-Walkers in Mission 30 in Afghanistan, but that being its own base and it being XOF, it was like, well, are they really here in the region? Well, here's our answer. Yeah, they're out here in the region. They're everywhere now. And so this is like, it's the proxy war stuff has spread really to, this would be like, probably Iraq or Afghanistan. Probably Iraq, though. Because, like I said, I'll get to the timeline stuff, but there's this Congo war stuff that's going on at the same time, which kind of sets up this dual relationship between Afghanistan and Africa that's going on after this, where, like I said, Africa kind of stands for our land base, and Afghanistan, the sea base. And really now the land base is going to stand for one side of this conflict, and the sea base is going to, or really Afghanistan now, is going to stand for the other side of the conflict. And what we're doing kind of represents what snakes are doing on either side of the conflict. But right now we're still kind of, well, who exactly this snake is, it's unclear. It really could still be the same Venom like Young Fox after his burning his big boss, and maybe he transformed. If you go back to that game, he doesn't really die at the end. He sends a transmission to Solid Snake after Outer Heaven blows up. He's basically like, haha, sucker, I got away. I'll see you again. And like I said, I think that's just a parasite power thing. The whole death is actually a transformation rule applies here. But it's like he's kind of still so. In a way, we've been playing as Snake this whole time, right? But we also have kind of been playing as Boss, in the way that they're kind of both the same person. Well, if in the last missions, we know that Big Boss really was kind of Skullface, and we were playing the role of Snake, and then Big Boss dies, and we become Big Boss after that. And then we kind of have our fall at Outer Heaven, which it really seems to be, like it's already happened here, but it may be that it happens immediately after Mission 32. It's not really clear to me. Maybe it's like we are Big Boss at this point, but we haven't had our fall yet at Outer Heaven in 95, which, again, I think was a cover-up, essentially. But we'll get, again, into the timeline stuff more with the next mission, and we'll figure it out there. I've already talked about the escaped prisoners being hunted again. I just want to note that this is Lamar Hate Palace, so medical platform context should be applied here. This also could relate to maybe what happened to Paz while she was being held captive back in Camp Omega back in 75. It also could relate to stuff that may have happened to Chico back in 75. Maybe at one point he was allowed to escape. I had this idea and I didn't really mention it, but maybe at some point they allowed Chico to escape to see where he would go, because maybe Boss was like, well, if we can't get any info out of him, maybe if we just let him think that he's escaped, he'll go somewhere and lead us to something that will help us. And so maybe that's where the whole, like, if you take his guards away, he'll just escape on his own kind of meme comes from, and why it's here in this game. But essentially, this identity of this prisoner, he's another you, and we're laundering Skullface's identity. We're getting Ishmael on the American side now, and we're covering stuff up. So let's move on to Mission 33. C2W Subsistence is our first repeat mission, and it's a subsistence one, and it's C2W now. Like I said, how to know too much is kind of like our new A Hero's Way, Mission 3. Well, then that makes sense as to why we're doing C2W again, Mission 4. So really, we're probably a new Snake at this point. It doesn't make sense that we're still playing just, if we are Boss, cool, we're the same guy. But if we're also Snake, there's a new Snake. So we're playing also as this new Snake. And since Ishmael Boss, we know, has kind of been, we've just helped him go off somewhere else, we're not him anymore. So he's kind of like detached from our identity here at this point. And it's like Ahab has become Ishmael, and there's a new Ahab. So the new Ahab, I think, is really Solidus. At this point, this is probably where he finally fully comes on the stage. I've been saying that maybe he was on the stage in the past for little points, but I also offered other explanations, and I really think it makes sense that Solidus probably doesn't really show up until here. We're told that a president is ousted in 1996. I think it's President Mombasa, maybe? It relates to what's going on in the Congo. Zaire changes its name to Congo. There's the first Congo War, and the second Congo War happens in '98. So I think this is kind of what we're seeing here is the setup for this war in the Congo. But first, there's this stuff happening in Afghanistan because it's like there's sort of these changes on, the Snake side of things, because we know Snake and Boss kind of, even though we're kind of playing both of them, they're also playing both sides. We're going to be kind of playing both sides of the conflict now. We've kind of been led on to know that we're playing both sides of the conflict with the presence of the Diamond Dogs containers, the stamps on them in OKB0. But they don't like outright tell it to us because you can't. That's sensitive intel stuff, so they don't put that there. They let you figure it out for yourself, and then they just keep doing the trick and hope that you've caught on. So now it's like we're Young Fox and Solidus. We're like Chico and Solidus, and we're going out. And what do we do first? We take out the intel. We take out the air stuff. Again, it's just a repeat of the same thing. And Solidus is kind of like another Chico in a way. He's kind of been through the same, not exactly the same process, but kind of the same initiation into Cypher. And I'm sure a lot of the same stuff that happens in the prologue for Ahab is also happening for Solidus. In the way that Venom is, like I said, he's both Ricardo Libre and George Sears. And he's also kind of Liquid Snake too. And Solid Snake, and Old Fox, and Zero. He's a lot. He's also kind of Vamp. Anyways, so what's going on here then? Like I said, is this cycle of conflict has started again, and so from '96 to '99, this is where the whole rise of Zanzibar land happens, and we'll see in a few missions the Oilix stuff is kind of back in play. And there's these wars in the Congo going on. And now Solidus is not Big Boss yet. He's still Snake, but it's like Solidus is being set up to become the next Big Boss by the time Zanzibar Land happens in '99. But the script for all of what we're about to see happen is kind of a retelling of what happened from '79 to '83, in that part of the conflict that we skipped over between missions 29 and 30. In other words, we're kind of going to see Afghanistan here stand in for Iraq and what had been going on in Iraq as the battleground for the proxy war between the Big Boss faction operating out of Iran and then the Zero and Ocelot factions operating elsewhere supporting the local Iraqis. So now we've got to basically turn those Iraq guys into the bad guys as Solidus is now fighting against them. So we're fighting against our own people. We're kind of, we've got more infighting happening here. And so, like I said, what we're doing is a retelling of '79 to '83, but we're also kind of going to be providing some groundwork for future context of 2001 when the U.S. invades Afghanistan. Probably has something to do with maybe Liquid Snake and stuff he had to do back then. Because we don't know all of Liquid's history, and it kind of doesn't make sense. When did he, do all of his stuff with Foxhound and become the leader of Foxhound? Well, that probably would have happened immediately leading up to Shadow Moses. So I'm guessing the 2001 U.S. invading Afghanistan thing probably is when Foxhound was kind of hooked into all of that stuff, and Liquid Snake was their leader, and he was probably, you could think of it as a whole nother cycle later, another C2W where Solidus would be the big boss. And after his fall, it's like now Liquid Snake is the new Snake. And then he's going to become Big Boss after his own cycle. And then he'll have his fall at Shadow Moses. And so on. So, that's all I've got for Mission 33. I want to go back to the timeline a little bit more. In '79, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and that was when the war really broke out there. But we know that Afghanistan, like I said, is kind of a stand-in for Iraq. So that's our way of thinking of And I don't know if it was literally in Iraq. Iraq might be a symbolic way of speaking of where this battleground was, and Iran could be a symbolic, like, neighboring country of where this battleground was, you know? And so all these world events that are listed in the timeline at the end of the Truth Mission are kind of real-world events that serve as symbolic stand-ins for what was going on in the cipher struggle at the time, basically. And that's why they list only the things they list, because it's like, if you listed everything that was going on in world politics, it would be, it wouldn't make sense. But, yeah, so it's like 96 to 99 is sort of a retelling of 79 to 83. And we know it's going to end with the U.S. invading and taking out the leader, which is Solid Snake comes in and takes out Saladin. And I think Saladin is Solidus. We know that Sniper Wolf was saved from the battlefield, she says, by Saladin. And we'll get to it later, but that happens in Mission 40. And that'll kind of confirm that we are Saladin, and she's Sniper Wolf. She's got the costume on and everything. And that implies that her Sniper Wolf identity probably started around this time in the 96 to 99 cycle. And she kept that all the way through to whenever Foxhound was deployed, probably with Liquid Snake as their leader, to Afghanistan under the U.S. And then after that would have been the Shadow Moses stuff. So I also wanted to mention Solid Snake. This could relate to what he was doing as well. I can't remember exactly when he was. I think it was sometime in the 80s that he was said to have first deployed. So maybe Solid Snake also deployed back somewhere in the 80s during that 79 to 83 section, or maybe he was even there in the late 80s when we're there, or maybe even between 83 and 86. I'd have to look into that more. But we know Solid Snake's retired after 99, essentially. So maybe he was and I think he was supposed to be retired after 95 as well, after that whole thing. So he comes out of retirement, if I'm not mistaken, for 99. And then he does it again in 05. But it's like, all this new Snake's beginning as, this A Hero's Way and C2W pair or combo, and To Know Too Much also kind of being a Too Fast, Too Furious reference. So it's like, we're doing A Hero's Way again. We're doing it twice. There's all this two references in the title of C2W. So it's kind of supposed to clue you into the fact that there's another loop going on. And I'll get into in the next mission kind of what happens after this conflict breaks out, and, what all's coming up next. With that said, I hope you all have enjoyed. Have a nice one. Peace.